So we're leading into another subcategory of session number 3, legal liabilities, legal responsibilities of boards. In this area, we're going to be highlighting more specifically the different topics that we discussed in the previous subpart, the first subpart of this session. And that's going to be when it comes to personal and board responsibilities and liabilities. We're going to be looking at what some of those are, and also how can we take steps to mitigate against those liabilities. So that's the specific area that we're going to address in this subpart of session 3. And I'm going to hand it over to Wayne to kind of give us some background and backdrop in this topic.
So we're looking at the concept and subject of risk as far as nonprofit board members and what might happen and how might we control or reduce those risks. I think from a background perspective, most organizations, I believe, that we're addressing are incorporated. So they are 501c3 nonprofit corporations. And one of the things about corporations that is true, whether it's a for-profit or a non-profit, or I guess there's a new category of corporations which are benefit corporations. One of the critical characteristics of first is limited liability. The idea is that if you're involved in a corporation, your liability is limited to whatever is involved in the organization. So in a for-profit setting, whatever you have invested is the most you stand to lose. In a nonprofit setting, what it would typically mean is that if you are part of a nonprofit corporation, a member or a director, that you also have liability limited to what the organization's assets are, and that you would not be held personally accountable for any kind of legal fees or fines or judgments against the organization. Now that's the general idea. One of the other things that's common as far as corporations are concerned is that it's a concept called centralized management, that a corporation is run by and through its board of directors. And in a nonprofit, of course, that is the board of directors and that fiduciary body that's responsible for the operations of the organization. So really what we're talking about is risk management. How do you manage the risk? How do you protect against being sued to the maximum extent possible? The last thing you want to end up doing is going out there and trying to save the world and then end up losing your house as a result of something that happened that you might have been able to have some control over. So I think when you look at the concept of risk management, it's been addressed in previous discussions, previous segments, that the first thing is to respond to your fiduciary responsibilities. Right, do what you're supposed to do. So, as far as the duty of loyalty, stay true to the mission, the duty of care, be responsible and legal and ethical in the way that things are conducted, and make sure that you put your best skills forward for the benefit of the organization. And the duty of obedience, to not be engaged in any kinds of conflicts of interest and things of that nature. I think that's the first thing. So really what you want to do is make sure that you're well educated on what the organization does. I think we talked about this before, as far as everything being mission driven, maybe to the extent that in your agenda, maybe the first thing that you do is you have a statement of mission right there as bullet point number 1 for the meeting. Everybody reads it and everybody acknowledges that they are working towards this particular goal, working towards this particular mission. I think that goes a long way in mitigating a lot of the risks that are involved in being a member of the board of a nonprofit organization. So if you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, you're probably okay, right? So I think that's number one, make sure that you understand what it is that you're doing and what your responsibilities are as a board member. Then beyond that, the idea of centralized management, looking at what the organization does and how it is directed and controlled, and it's through the board of directors. So the board of directors does have a great deal of responsibility. So they need to stay in touch. They need to stay engaged with their constituency. They should be going out and trying to see what the community's impression or what the community's awareness is of the organization. I think that's critical as far as a board member and as far as discharging your responsibilities as a board as a whole. I think a lot of times we look at, when we say board, we're looking at it as a collective, and that it is the authorized representative, the authorized management agency or agent of the corporation. We also look at individual board members in their capacity as part of the collective, and then as in their capacity as individuals that have personal responsibility to do certain things and are in that role of having personal responsibilities. May also be liable personally for things that happen, so bad things that can happen. So I think we talked about this before. I think one of the things that we address after making sure that we understand as best as we possibly can what the mission of the organization is and how the activities that are performed by the organization fulfill this mission. Then afterwards we'll look at things that happen quite frequently in any kind of organizational or business environment. So looking at when is it that there is a possibility that the board will be held accountable for things that have happened. We mentioned in the discussion of bylaws that everything needs to be documented and people need to agree to this as a board so that the actions which are taken by the organization are being taken on the part of the organization and not because of any one individual's direction. So to make sure that the board is always acting cohesively as an entity, as a body, goes a long way. There are things though that are beyond our control. So I know a lot of organizations will probably do things like fundraisers. And one of the things about fundraisers that we're always concerned about is, what if something goes wrong? What if somebody gets sick as a result of the food reserve? What if they slip and fall? So some of the things that you'll have to think about is getting general liability insurance. It's something that a lot of organizations can get. It's not that expensive. It can also be gotten for a particular activity. So I'm part of the board that we have an organizational fundraiser that occurs once a year, and we buy an insurance policy to cover specifically for any kind of general liability that could occur as a result of the activity that we conduct. So we have 400 or 500 people coming for an event. We serve them dinner, we provide entertainment. We are on the grounds of a public school in Hawaii, and one of the requirements that the state has as far as our use of the facility is that we have to provide liability coverage against any kind of lawsuit that could occur, so that the state is not the agent that's being sued in the event that somebody slips and falls or somebody gets food poisoning or something like that. And that is something that we do for, it's a very minimal cost, but it is something that you have to think about ahead of time. And I think a lot of these things really will come down to just thinking about what it is that you need to be doing before you do it, right? Rather than be proactive, rather than reactive. And then we also mentioned in the previous session, as far as just general responsibility is concerned, as long as people are doing their legal responsibilities as a fiduciary, having directors and officers insurance coverage in the event that the organization gets sued for something that happens. Again, it could be like something general, like somebody is a victim of an accident or sustains an injury as a result of being on our premises or an activity that we conduct. And then the other thing that we mentioned is that there is so much liability that's being placed on all kinds of organizations that have employees, and that people will sue, and that in organizations where the board functions in a more hands-on kind of basis, where particularly they might not have that much staff to put all the work onto, the board may be acting in some capacity as a manager, which is a possibility, right? Because they're more engaged and hands-on in the activities that are occurring, and those activities might relate to employment matters, so that any kind of wrongful termination, kind of a suit against the organization, any kind of discrimination suit against the organization that is being filed by an individual because they're saying that, I got fired because, not because I wasn't doing my job, but because of something that somebody has as a idea about me because of my race or my religion, national origin, and they're discriminating against me, and that's why they fired me. And these kind of lawsuits occur very frequently in employment matters. So, having employment practices, liability insurance to protect the board and the organization for lawsuits that can occur in the context of wrongful termination or discrimination kind of action against the organization. And there are other things that we'll continue to talk about.
I think so. I'm glad you mentioned some. I'm glad you mentioned that. A board, in some instances, can act and operate as management, and that's beautiful that you mentioned that, Wayne, because your nonprofit may not be at a level that can either sustain a CEO/executive director, or has the capacity to facilitate a CEO, executive director, to do the full functions of that role. So they may behave or act in a management level of responsibility to manage the staff, the volunteers that need to come in and do certain aspects of the operational functions of the nonprofit. So that's a good point, but in that role, we really have to look at the liability that we take on, because now it's, okay, we're no longer just the board, but we are also getting into the crosshairs of the Department of Labor and the regulations concerning that. So it's fair to say that, that insurance needs to be there, for our protection, as well as the employees that we hire and the volunteer staff that we bring on. So that's critical. The one other area that we touched on in the last session section of this series is when it comes to an individual, and I want to just bring this up. I kind of want to get dirty right now. So if you have a role board member, okay, this person is like, listen, I'm disgruntled. I don't feel that I'm being listened to, and I want our organization to go in this specific way. So I'm going to start taking steps to make sure that we do X, Y, and Z. Those steps might land me, Rogue, individually in hot water, or the entire board in hot water, depending on what I'm doing. So if I'm saying, hey, I think you all wanted to go out and get a loan for $500,000. I think we need to get one for $1 million. So I'm going to go. You went to First Bank of Hawaii. I'm going to the Bank of Hawaii and ask for $1 million. And I'm going to do it, but I'm a board member. So they might allow me to go through that process, and I might get it. Not be able to pay it back, but I might get it. So as taking a step as a rogue board member, I think certain things should be done. The collective says, no, this is not what we agreed upon, but I'm saying you guys are not. I got another vision. Other things I might do is, we may not want to serve the North Shore. We may want to only serve, Salt Lake and below. communities. But I'm saying, no, I like the North Shore, I want to serve the North Shore, so I'm going to go and publicize our nonprofit to the North Shore. But we don't have the capacity to do that, and the board knows that. But I'm going to do it because I feel this is the direction we should go. So all of these things I'm doing, it's making me and i.e. the nonprofit responsible for things that the collective really didn't agree upon, but I'm a board member, and so the outside world, they don't know this situation that's going on with myself and the rest of the board members, but they just see, no, you represent that nonprofit, that board, so we're gonna go with that. We trust you as a representative of that board. So in that respect, we gotta be careful, because if you have a rogue board member like that, yes, it may be situations where they're individually, personally, you are liable, but there also may be situations where we know all that. We just know that that person is a board member, so all of y'all are on the hook for that kind of thing. So how would we address that? How would we kind of chop that up? I want to just discuss a little bit about that rogue board member.
I was already shifting out of my seat, ready to fire you, but, okay.
Well, bylaws would be something.
Yes, the bylaws, as we've discussed before with the ED situation, for the director that we've had in the other scenario. But for this one, okay, let me go across my list.
Mm-hmm.
This rogue person is fulfilling the mission, in a sense, right?
Okay.
I think so. That's what it sounds like. They are fulfilling their mission in a sense.
In their mind, yes.
Right.
But it's not a collective agreed upon strategic.
Right. But in appearance, they're following the mission.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
They're doing the bare minimum of what they're.
Actually, more.
Okay.
But they're rogue.
So they're hitting their responsibilities, but doing more.
Too much passion. Yeah.
Too much passion.
Yeah.
Is there such a thing?
But they have a lot more outside passion. Let's say it like that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So with that mindset, there's not really a good reason to kind of go through the process to let them go. Am I correct with that?
Well, here's the deal. Like, if you think about it, the board said, in this theoretical scenario, the board said we need and can afford to pay back $500,000.
Okay.
We can't afford to pay back $1 million.
Mm-hmm.
They say no, we need, and the one that's kind of rogue says no, we need $1 million, but we don't have the resources and capability to pay that back in the short or long term. We can't even pay back the interest and stuff that's going to build up this year, and they know that, but they don't. We need that money, so they want to get And in the other instance where the board collectively has said we're going to serve Salt Lake and South, on Oahu. That's what we have the capacity to serve. We have the manpower policies to serve, and the rogue says no. I have a heart for the North Shore, and I want us to serve. I want us to serve the North Shore right now. And as starting to make inroads, hey, we're going to provide this service for you all.
Right.
And the board collectively knows we don't have the capacity to pay that $1 million board to service. It's not that we don't want to, it's like we don't have the capacity strategically and, responsibly to serve that North Shore area. So the rogue person is just, they're doing too much, if I can say it that way. You know what I mean? And they're making the nonprofit responsible for things and for activities and for programs that the nonprofit capacity-wise may not be able to fulfill. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But think about the bank is not depending on us principal and interest. The North Shore community is not depending on us these services. What if we can't deliver?
Then it becomes an
It's a
issue.
problem. You know what I mean?
Because I have this question as well. Does it matter what their title is? Or across any title on the board, it will be an issue? Because I'm trying to imagine, what if this person was like the chairperson of the organization? That's a lot worse than if they were like a member of the organization, you know?
A board member is now the chair does have, you know, I guess the legislative power, you know, to direct
Yeah.
and to do different things. But as a board member, you're representing the board. You know, you don't have to be treasurer, you don't have to be secretary, you don't have to be the chair. As a board, fully functional board member, you know, you represent the board. And some things that you sign, the contracts and things, they count. They count. There's a lot of instances where you can sign a contract, and if you're a board member and you sign it, it's effective.
Because I know, as Wayne said, and he's also mentioned a lot of good things in the last session, or the part one of this session, where, you know, the board can definitely get all of these insurances to, you know, keep them kind of safe from a lot of these risks as much as possible. And so I'm trying to think, okay, if I was responsible as a board to get all these insurances to minimize any, you know, liabilities that may come forth, but I'm kind of stuck here because I'm thinking, okay, I'm covered, but what do I do about this rogue person?
So, go ahead.
Like,
Well, I think
Yeah.
it comes to like one of those old sayings, you know, there's no I in team,
Yeah,
right,
right? And the board is a team.
yeah,
And then from a legal perspective, the board is an entity that is authorized to act on behalf of the organization. No individual board member is authorized to act on behalf of the organization. And one of the things that, you know, you're alluding to is when you have the chair of the board, perhaps as the rogue board member. You don't really want to have a situation where sometimes it's unavoidable, where one individual becomes the persona of the organization, right? Because then it seems like that individual is by default authorized to do things.
yeah.
But when you think about, you know, just the basic separation of duties, you know, when you talk about probably budgeting and
Yes.
finance, and then having a checking account for the organization, and you probably discuss the need to have multiple signatories on a check so that no one person could run with the whole checking account and drain it to empty, right? So it should be the same way, that no one person can apply for a loan on behalf of the board or on behalf of the organization. And I think the point that Aaron's talking about, you know, in his example about the road board member wanting to serve a different community and possibly a different constituency. I'm not sure how many of you are from Hawaii, but we have this situation that occurs all the time. You have board members, and sometimes the board members are designated to be from a particular island or community, right? So we got four
right,
counties, right? Four functioning counties, operational counties. We got Hawaii Island, Hawaii County, we got Maui County, Honolulu City County, Honolulu, Oahu, and the county of Kauai. So sometimes we'll have constituents and board members that, let's say, come from Hawaii Island, and they say, you know what, this $1 million that we're gonna borrow, let's just chop it up 4 ways. You know, let's go 25% to Hawaii County, 25% to Maui County, 25% to Hawaii County, 25% to Honolulu County, because the person on Hawaii Island is sick and tired of everything being so Honolulu-centric, so Hawaii-centric, and that more things need to be done that are in concert with the mission on the neighbor islands on Hawaii Island. So this is something that has to be reckoned with on a regular basis when you have these kinds of individuals that best of intentions, good heart, but really strongly wanting to have a certain area covered.
That's right.
And this is when it's critical to document. Because remember, under the bylaws, right, the board is the authorized
That's right.
representative of the organization. So it has to be very clearly stated in the minutes, right, in any kind of documents that, let's say, support the application of the loan,
That's right.
that this loan is for this organization.
That's right.
And that these are the authorized individuals to take the loan out on behalf of the organization.
That's right.
And that this is the intended use of the funds. Then if the person goes out on their own, right, they're on their own.
Yeah.
Right, I mean, you want to create a situation where, this is going to sound bad, but you want to be able to isolate that rogue board member and put them out on an island by themselves.
Yeah.
So that if they do anything, any bank that deals with them has to reckon with the idea that they're dealing with that individual,
Yeah.
not the organization, right? And if any question comes about, you have the record.
Yeah.
The minutes say, this is the function,
Yeah.
this is the amount,
Yeah.
this is what it's for, right? That there is no vagueness to it, right? It is crystal clear that the organization has set out that this is what the purpose of this particular money, or this particular loan, or this particular service is, and this is how it's gonna be done. Now then, you know, if that rogue board member feels so strongly about it, right, then you put the onus on them, you put the burden on them to basically come to terms with the rest of the people, right, come to Jesus, right, and do what everybody wants to do according to the mission, not their mission, but the mission of the organization, or quit,
Yeah.
right? You know, it's kind of like, unfortunately, this happens in a lot of work situations, right? The employer makes it so difficult for the employee that they quit,
Yeah.
right? Rather than firing them, they force them out,
Yeah.
right? And this is, in a way, like that, but hopefully it's in a more productive and a more humanistic and a more gentle way, you know, to just let that individual know that, hey, look, this is the mission. This is what has been decided by the entity called the board as a fiduciary for the organization and the beneficiaries. You're not in concert with that. You cannot condone the actions that you're taking as being representative of us as an organization. So you want to make sure that you can clearly point to facts that say that this person did it on their own. They were not representative. And the law will back that up, because no one director is an agent of the corporation. Right? So that you have that protection. I think that's something that, you know.
So it doesn't matter their title across the board.
No, it shouldn't. You know, there's something called inherent authority that comes with a title. But if the organizational documents and the minutes and the, you know, the loan authorization clearly state that these are the authorized signatories, and you know, like for something as big as, you know, $1 million loan, let's say, you want the entire board on a resolution approving it, right?
Yeah.
So that you have everybody signed off on it, and you know that it's done by the board as an entity, by the board as a whole, and not any one individual. Because if not, you always run the risk of that person being able to truly go rogue. Go out there, take out a big loan for their personal purposes, right? And that would be a tremendous breach of fiduciary duty. And that would probably be the end of the nonprofit organization, because financially they probably couldn't sustain that kind of hit.
So let's say that does happen though, and they take out that big loan and they can't pay it back. That goes back onto the board members as well, right? Like their personal finances then may need to get.
Maybe not, right? Because remember, the corporation, if the board is acting on behalf of the organization, on behalf of the corporation, then the limited liability feature should kick in. Right? And the only way in that kind of situation that the board members individually could be held accountable is if the bank required them to give a personal guarantee. Right? Now, in many organizations, somebody is so into it and such a strong believer, such a true believer, that they will give that personal guarantee, right? And God bless them for doing that, but that's really dangerous, right? Not only for the sake of that individual, because they could stand to have to pay back the entire amount themselves, but it also starts to say that the board is allowing this person to do those things.
As an individual.
Right? That they are condoning that behavior and that action.
I like where we were going and where we're going. One of the things that mitigates a board from the actions of a rogue member are the board's performance of duty of care. So if we didn't have minutes that were approved and that clearly stated we're seeking $500,000 from the First Bank of Hawaii, we're using those funds for X, Y, and Z, board's approved it, these minutes have been approved, we have that document, that literature there, that if the bank says, no, we gave it to them, and we gave it to them because we know they're your board members, so they said everything was good. So because we have those minutes, we can contest the bank and say, well, y'all, you need to look at your protocols. So the bank is forced to say, okay, well, we just have to go after that person as an individual, right? But if we didn't perform duty of care, there may be other things and steps that the bank can do to try to get their funds from the nonprofit. You know what I mean? If we didn't perform the duty of care. So I think, and that kind of goes back to my viewers, like you have to take, you have to take the test, and you have to take very seriously, you know, that responsibility to perform your duty of care, you know, and that's keeping minutes, that's, you know, going and abiding by the bylaws, all those things, because they are things that are mitigators to the risk that you bear as a board member. So I think that's critical. The other thing is with the North Shore, it's having, because you don't want to disenfranchise communities, and you don't want, because community just know we need that too. You know what I mean? So we need again a good PR because they don't care about liability. They don't care. They just know they came here. Habitat for Humanity said they were going to come and they were going to do X, Y, and Z, and they didn't do it. You know, kind of a thing. So we don't. So that's why you need the PR to come out and say, okay, listen, that we're and may not. And the PR might not even focus on the road board member. It just may focus on, here is our plan of action for the future. We plan to come out, you know, maybe mention, you know, that person is no longer with us, whatever, and then go forward. But it's a lot of things that need to be done to address that road board member. But I'm going to bring up something that we ain't talked about in the last section of this session is the bylaws. There needs, even if we're unable to force that person out, there needs to be something in the bylaws to say, hey, if certain things occur with us, with me as a board member, with you as a board member, there needs to be steps that the other board members can take to make sure that our ship stays on, you know, the direction that it needs to go in as a board of that nonprofit. And so I think it's important for our bylaws to, you know, take and make, because when you have to get with me if I'm wrong about this, but I think the Hawaii revised statutes concerning boards, I think it's a 5-year term, I believe. I'm not sure if the term limits a 5, but there's a term for board members. Now you can you know, be a board and your term is up, and then you can be a board member again, but it's cyclical. Right, so there needs to be, we know that with robust boards that new members come on every so often, because it doesn't have to be 5 years, it could be 3, 2 years, whatever, you know, is in the bylaws and the articles for that particular board. But we know that we're going to have these new members come on, and we may and need to probably take consideration for 1 or 2 of those times in the next 10 years are gonna be folks that we need to let go really fast. You know what I mean? So we need to have contingencies within these different laws that actually address these situations. You know what I mean? So I think that was key. I think that's important.
I have a really quick question because Wayne brought a very good point up, and I always tell everyone this, but documentation is key, right?
Yeah.
That's why I always email people, so they don't tell me you said this instead.
Right.
No, I have this in
Yeah.
writing.
Right.
And so I'm trying to think, I know a lot of habits that people have is, oh no, I told you this, I said this verbally, I gave my verbal approval, you know, like, I guess my question is, how do I fix that?
Well,
Like, can you retro a document? You can't really retro a document. You have to be like, you know.
so you want to make sure that the rules are set as to how documentation will occur, right? And you want it to be in writing. If it's important, get it in writing,
Yeah.
right? Or because even a recording
Right.
is not necessarily that reliable.
Okay.
So, like with the minutes as an example.
Yeah.
Okay, the minutes are taken and the minutes are distributed for approval by the board. That means that the board not only got the document, but they acknowledged the document.
Yeah.
But it's one thing to send a message to somebody, it's another thing for them to respond that they got it,
Okay.
right? So that's really critical. So like with the minutes as a prime example, everybody gets to look at them, and if they say that they see something that they believe was not truly what happened at that time, they can correct it, or they can raise objection to it at that time. But once it's accepted by the body, by the board as a whole, then that becomes the Bible for that particular time.
Yeah.
Alright. So it's not just document, but it's document with acknowledgement.
Okay.
Because then that way nobody can say, hey, I didn't say this.
Right.
Right? But if they acknowledged it and it's on the minutes again, as the board accepted this with no reservations, no corrections, no objections, then everybody has to say, well, that must have been what happened, right?
Yeah.
Because you can't prove otherwise at that time.
Can I push back a little bit? Now, remember how we were saying with COVID, online Zoom meetings possibly being recorded. Can that recording of the meeting suffice for your minutes, or you know, it gotta be documented?
Yeah. I would say that that recording is a supplement
Okay.
to the recorded
Mhm.
minutes.
Mhm.
Right, because not everybody's gonna watch the video the whole
Right.
length of it.
So you still need that acknowledgement after the fact.
Because the minutes also serve to help the board coalesce and condense all the things that happen,
Mhm.
right? Because that becomes the substance of the meeting,
Yeah.
right? So that particularly when a vote is
Yes.
called for,
Yes.
you have an actual record of
Yes.
yeas and nays.
Mhm.
Right?
Okay.
And then that is there, and that cannot be, after the fact.
Mhm.
Oh, I didn't vote for it,
Yeah.
right? And then, of course, the other thing with that is, again, with the rogue board member,
Yes.
it will help them to start to see what it is that the organization is trying to do. And they can voice objection, they can send in a written,
Yeah.
kind of minority opinion to it. But
Okay.
again, that would be a minority view,
Right.
and not something that the organization as a whole took as to what the process and what the path would be going forward. So we want to make sure that we have those kinds of things in place.
Document and acknowledge.
That's it. So I think we actually tackled this really good. I think we did a good job on this area. I will say to my folks looking at watching this video, Jennifer brought up a good point. There's a lot of nonprofits that we work with, all three of us work with, that have a weakness. And you all looking at this might have the same weakness. A lot of things that we do are verbal. We give our verbal okays, our verbal addressing of issues, recognition of different things. And when it comes to the legal crosshairs of our responsibility as board members, we need to document. We definitely need to document and have it there, because when we, God forbid, we find ourselves in court. Listen, he said, she said, they don't care about any of that stuff. Where is it documented? When was it documented? And who is it documented by? They don't care about that other stuff. So you have to, if it's important enough, it needs to be documented. So we have to break the habit, if you will, of verbals. You know, we have to break that habit. I think, and it's not you watching this. You're not unique. It's a problem. It's an issue across the nation. I mean, a lot of nonprofits, especially smaller nonprofits, do a lot of things by verbal acknowledgement, and those verbal acknowledgements need to be transformed to actual documented acknowledgements. So, but thank you, and we will see you on the next topic.